Welcome back to the show, my friends. I am your host, Eric Szilagyi. If you've had an uncomfortable experience and you'd like to have it featured on the show, please get a hold of me at contact.uncomfortable@gmail.com. The world wants to hear your story. They want to hear your experiences. So please get a hold of me and let's get yours on a future episode of Uncomfortable. If you don't already, make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram, both at Uncomfortable Podcast 65. And please remember to leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you can. That's the main way you can help the algorithm get out in front of more listeners. And with more listeners, that means more people coming forward with their experiences. Head over to Uncomfortable Podcast on YouTube and check out the show in its video form. And while you're there, hit subscribe and the notification bell. That way you'll be notified every time I upload a new version of the podcast. If you're interested in helping support the show, head over to patreon.com/uncomfortablepodcast770 and check out what we have there. Or if a standalone contribution is more to your liking, you can do that as well at the Red Circle sponsor tab. The links for those and our Discord server will be in the show notes below. Bigfoot and Brews and Spirits 2 will be September 14th with VIP dinner the night before. Both will be held at Sister Lakes Brewing Company in Dowagiac, Michigan. Confirmed for this year are speakers Amy Boo from the Olympic Project and her own project, Zoo Book, Scott Tompkins from the Bigfoot Mapping Project, Salt Fort State Park's naturalist John Hickenbottom, and special guest author and journalist Chatan Noir. And the Archbishop Christina Rake will round out the paranormal side of things. The most recent addition to the much anticipated return of everyone's favorite Bigfoot, Bodine. That's right. Bodine has cleared with me that he will be available and on site for the event. Tickets will be on sale by probably no later than the end of the second week of March. I will put out a special announcement as soon as they are available. And speaking of Bigfoot, tonight, yet again, we dive into the nuances of this elusive creature. Tonight's guest has spent years researching the hairy man, and from what I understand, a little bit more than just the furry friend of ours. He's even spent some time in Switzerland researching a very remarkable case. You can find his work under the name of Unacknowledged Unknown on YouTube and Unacknowledged and Unknown on Instagram. So if you're ready, let's get into it. If you will, please give a warm, uncomfortable welcome to tonight's guest, Mr. Don Schneider. Don, welcome to Uncomfortable.
Hello, Eric. How are you doing today?
Doing well, thank you. So, Don, you reached out to me via Instagram, I believe it was, and we had a little bit of weirdness there. We were talking about that before we started recording, where I not all of my messages, but some in particular, and yours was one of them, that I just had everything from you to me disappeared. And thankfully you reached out again, and I felt terrible that I had not gotten back to you, but any evidence of our conversation was pretty much gone. And then once you messaged me again, then the messages in the Instagram thread, it started to repopulate, and most of our conversation came back, but the first 3 or 4 messages from you initially are still gone. So I don't know what the heck happened. I do want to apologize. It was nothing intentional, that I didn't mean to not get back to you, but it just, the information was simply gone. And that's why I encourage people, if you want to get a hold of me, the best way to get a hold of me and the most consistent way is use the Uncomfortable Podcast email, contact.uncomfortable@gmail.com. That I've had no problems with. So But thankfully you reached back out, and I was so glad that you did, because you had sent me some things early on, and I was very interested, wanted to talk to you. And let's get into some of that, because you sent me some pictures of some structures that you'd come across. You alluded to having done some kind of investigating in Switzerland, and what? Just go ahead and tell everybody what unacknowledged and unknown is all about.
Well, unacknowledged and unknown is that's my name of my YouTube channel, and I go by you on 52 on Instagram, which also is represents unacknowledged and unknown, and I'm also you 52 or unacknowledged and unknown on my new Rumble platform. And what it's all about is I investigate world events, suppressed history of mankind, uh, of course, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, which probably was the original thing that started me on this whole journey of discovery. And then, of course, that led me into some other stuff I was already familiar with, and was sort of had a little skepticism about it. But like everything else I research, I don't ask people to prove it to me, whether it's right or wrong. I, as any detective, any good detective, goes and to find out for themselves firsthand. Whether it's Bigfoot research or I have to fly to Switzerland to research the probably under the radar, probably very little known. It's got very little publicity. It's suppressed here in the United States. Unless you live in Germany or Austria, Switzerland, or any of those sort of alpine countries, it's people aren't familiar with, and that's the Billy Meier contact information. The Billy Meier, the Swiss farmer who is now 87 years old, who's been in contact with allegedly extraterrestrials since he was 5 years old. And I met this man in 2018. So my Bigfoot research was, I thought, great, I'll be in Switzerland. I could see Bigfoot are just about in every country. It wasn't going to take me very much to confirm that there was Bigfoot activity in the Swiss Alps. Once I got there, it immediately reminded me of parts of the Colorado Rockies, parts of El Capitan, and some of the mountains in California, Sequoia National Forest. It had a bit of both of those, very alpine climate. And so it didn't take me much to find out. But what sort of led me there was in the official contacts from 1975 until, I believe these were official contacts, which were from 1975 to 1982. I hope I'm not mistaken on that. Billy was having contact with an extraterrestrial, a female named Samjasi. Samjasi was her name. And both those were the official contacts. The contact started when he was 5 and continue to this day, but they're not official. There was a segment of the contacts, he recorded everything down in specificity, and he everything was very accurate.
When
And
you let me jump in here real quick. When you say official, what's to delineate between what was considered official and just regular contact?
Unofficial contacts. The official contacts were basically these people, and now again, these are just people like us from another star system, another basically within our universe. Were basically wanted to have official contacts where he would write down verbatim, word for word, in Higher German and Swiss German, to then be eventually authorized to be translated into English and I believe some other major languages.
Okay.
Those were destined to start in 1975. And I actually did a video where I went to Saddleleg, which is a small community near Schmidruti in Switzerland, where he actually started the official contact in 75 when some Jassies spaceship, they refer to it as a beam ship, landed and officially started this contact, which was a collaborative effort between him and these people from off-world, these foreigners. But they're not really foreigners. They share a past with us. So anyhow, what delineates between that is at some point the contacts ended and they became unofficial contacts, and the translations became unauthorized but permissible by Billy Meier and the group. He didn't necessarily create a group, but there were people that were following his contacts, were more familiar with not just the contacts, but the information these people, these extraterrestrials, were giving Billy. And now I've been reading these contact notes and reading the what I call the creational energy books for over 10 years now. And it's got a lot of wisdom, a lot of information. It has nothing to do with religion. I don't like to use the word, it's spiritual. They've eventually replaced that word spiritual with another word because spiritual is misleading. It has a religious connotation.
What's the word that replaces it?
Well, they use the word creation energy, which is actually the correct way. It used spiritual centuries, probably thousands of millennia ago. The word spirit or spiritual had a different connotation. It did mean creation or the energy of creation or the creation of energy, creation energy. But over the years, it became overused as a buzzword to mean anybody involved in paranormal was anybody that wanted to consider themselves spiritual. They used that word. So it was like the word love. It got overused to the point where it lost its meaning. So the German is very accurate in its meaning, and that's why the translation is very difficult to go from German into English, because you might need a paragraph or a couple sentences in English to describe one German word, which is all encompassing. So German is probably one of the most accurate languages in the world. So when I met Billy, he urged me, he says, well, your name is Schneider. He says, you're German. I go, yeah. He says, you should speak German. So I'm now learning German. There's been a lot of pushback on this. When you go to Wikipedia, any of the media sites, online internet.com sites that have anything to say about Billy that are not affiliated with him, have never met him, are just basically basing their information on sources they've either read about. These people have bashed him to the nth degree, and that information, it's like if I want to know about Eric Salagi, I want to know about you, I talk to nobody in your family. I don't talk to you, but I go to everybody that might have read about you, heard about you, or printed a news article about you. But nobody, this is what's going on with the internet. So when I saw all this suppression going on, and I thought, well, I've got to find out how to find who this person is, find the source material. Well, thank God there was source material. There was a gentleman out of England who actually created a site called futureofmankind.uk.org. And he has reproduced all the contacts that have been translated into English. He's a gentleman out of England. And then, of course, there's FIGO's actual site. The FIGO interest group, that's the group that is core members and passive members that work. Some work at the center. Some are tasked with sharing the information. They're not a cult. They're nothing like that. You go to Wikipedia, yes, they'll put it down as a cult. I went there. I wanted to find out for myself, as a Bigfoot investigator who didn't believe all they were saying about tree structures, who didn't believe everything I heard on the internet, on YouTube, or any of these other platforms, 99% of what people were saying about Bigfoot. And a lot of these people were not boots on the ground investigators. Some were. Right. And to aggrandize themselves, to make themselves look good, even the researchers were taking things and making a mountain out of a molehill to embellish it, to give themselves some kind of significance. And after I developed sort of this ability to find out, well, hey, are people BSing? Are they telling the truth? I thought, well, how about meeting this gentleman who claims to be talking to extraterrestrials since he was 5 years old? So I went down there in 2018 with a friend of mine, did some of my research there, met him, met some of the people that lived there, were core members, some of the people that had weekly duties. They come there once or twice a week to do their duties, work in the gardens. It's an incredible farm, and find out a little about if my BS meter could find out if they were telling the truth. And everybody I met, I could sense were not lying to me. But I met Billy, and Billy come up and he shook my hand, and I remember talking to him on the phone before I went up there. He's just a normal guy like everybody else. Doesn't want to be put on a pedestal. He doesn't go anywhere. He doesn't want to fly to this country. And when I met him, he, I believe 23 or 22 assassination attempts had already transpired. So
assassination attempts on him.
On his life, yes. And he named the various alphabet agencies involved. He told the truth about some things that had not yet transpired in what I call predictive information, where I have yet all his predictions. Now, we're not dealing like with Gene Dixon or Barbara Marciniak, these people that are alleged psychics, mediums who claim that they have some kind of connection. No, his predictions have been 100% accurate in specificity. He even described I hope you don't have to edit this out, but he even described and named the COVID-19 by the specific name it was originally called in 1987, 86, again in 91 or 92, and then he repeated it again in 2003, specifically naming it. He named where the virus would spread from and everything. He named the province it came out of. He even predicted the assassination of JFK. I mean, the list is just like a hit list, kept coming. I was like, where is this going to end? And so I went to Switzerland to find out if there was anything I could sense that there were skeptics that had gone there and visited him. Some came away convinced, and a lot of other skeptics who had never gone there to this day, like Cal Korff, still claim he's a hoaxer.
So, okay, what I'd like you to do for me is I'm kind of unclear on how the topic of Bigfoot led you to this. Oh, I mean, okay. How did that whole thing tie in?
Well, what happened was, what led me to that, which sort of was the defining moment that made me realize I had to visit him, is I had been having an interest in the Sasquatch Genome Project and had talked to Melba Ketchum, not directly, but we talked sometimes to the wee hours of the morning on Facebook Messenger. And this went on for a period of, I want to say at least a year, maybe longer. I'm still in touch with Melba Ketchum, but she's involved in another project now, so it's hard for her to get back to me. So I wanted to find out about the Sasquatch Genome Project. So I read her papers. I read her papers, which were based on the sequencing the entire Sasquatch genome, the progenitor, the paternal side, which is the progenitor DNA, and trying to understand that. And so during that period of time, I'm reading the contact reports. And now the contact reports, we're talking about in excess of 20,000 pages, probably more than that, because he wrote, some of the contact reports have created books. They're called contact blocks. But at this point, I believe he's written over 55 books. But in one of the contact reports, I believe it was contact report 251 conversation, and there was some other contact reports where he talks about going up in a beam ship, which is basically a flying saucer as you would look at it. And now this seems to be very far-fetched stuff for some people. But you have to understand, I'm a Bigfoot researcher, so I'm sort of already out on the fringe.
You're out on a limb already.
I'm already out on a limb. So I thought, okay. So I'm reading this contract report, and he confirms at one point they go to, in the beam ship, one of his companions, he refers to him as the Plejaren, and they come and they have their contact conversation, took him up in a beam ship. I believe it was, at one point it was Ptah, and the other one might have been potentially Quetzal was their name, took him up in a beam ship, and at one point they took him to the Himalayas, or the Himalayas, however you want to pronounce it, and he spotted 2 Bigfoot or Yeti creatures, and he saw them from the beam ship. And so he got into a conversation with his extraterrestrial companion, and in these later conversations, they explained to him, yes, they are, he says, what are they? Billy's asking them, are they part human? What are they? And he says, they share a common past with us human beings, that they have an unknown primate in a millennial, many thousands of years ago. Their DNA got mixed with female human DNA. And from that mixing, that created a hybrid, which we know as Bigfoot, Sasquatch, and Yeti. And when he mentioned Bigfoot and Sasquatch, he was clear to say they come in 4 subgroups that are related to the Yeti. So when he was talking about subgroups or subspecies, you could say, well, okay, so maybe they're talking about the Amnasta, the Russian Yeti, the Himalayan Yeti, the Sasquatch, and possibly he mentioned the skunk ape. So, I mean, there's a breakdown. There were 4 species or 4 subspecies. He went a little further, and he says, do you know that during this mixing, other chimera animals or hybrid animals were created? And they explained to Billy, like certain old world monkeys and chimpanzees have human DNA in them. So when people say, well, chimpanzees have 98% of their DNA or 97% of their DNA is human DNA. The chromosomes are identical. That apparently that chimpanzees and some of the old world monkeys descended from this hybridization between an unknown primate and modern humans, meaning us.
See, that kind of goes against what I've always thought, as much as that rather than them coming from us, that we, and maybe most of my mind is kind of made up on that because of, the theory of evolution, but that we would have sprang from them. It's interesting to hear the take of that there. And I realize that we share a lot of DNA, but we also share a lot of DNA with trees.
Yes.
We don't look anything.
Yes.
We don't look anything like trees, but to hear it in a reverse from what I'm normally hearing, that's pretty interesting that they would have been an offshoot of us. It's something I want to go back to that you said before I forget about it. You mentioned Billy in the craft with his companion, And the way you said it, hopefully is the way I took it, that the extraterrestrial companion referred to themselves as human beings as well.
Yes, we share a common past with them. We, the Plejaren, and modern humans on Earth have a common ancestor. In this past, there was, I guess you'd say, a branching off. They chose, some of their descendants chose to go a different path, a different way, and ended up settling in a different part of the universe at what I call another a dimension within our universe, which is also a universe, and they settled in that dimension. In their, I actually forget the name of their universe, but they always make the comment that dimensions are equivalent to a universe. It's just another name for a universe, how we understand it. But they went that direction and continued to evolve and develop to the point where they're 40,000 or more years ahead of us in technological development and even in spiritual development. They're that far ahead. On this planet, we chose to sort of devolve or sort of stay stagnant. So they were part of that, because in the old days, they were our gods. Their ancestors were our gods, and they feel sort of, I guess, a word, responsible for our plight and our journey to this day. And that's why they're giving this information to Billy over the last 81 years since they contacted him. So that's what I was trying to get at. You were saying, well, how does that connect? How did Bigfoot connect to me going to Switzerland? Well, when I read this in Contact 251 and some of the other contacts about them explaining to Billy how Bigfoot evolved, and it hasn't been around that long, anywhere from 130,000 to 70,000 years is what they're trying to, if you read between the lines and you decipher it, you understand that Bigfoot hasn't been around anywhere more than 70,000 to maybe 130,000 years since this interaction with human Homo sapiens, and then the emergence of these descendants, which we nowadays call Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti. And I thought, so when I read this, I thought, where did I hear this before? Where does this sound so familiar? And that's when I came across the Melba Ketchum DNA study, her trying to explain in her DNA study after the entire sequencing of the Sasquatch genome that the paternal DNA, the nuclear DNA, was an unknown hominid primate, and the mitochondrial and also nuclear DNA on the paternal side was Homo sapien sapien female. And I was like, wait a second, this is in consonance.
And she even gave a specific to within
a timeline.
What was it? 30, 40,000 years?
She said 30,000 years and potentially even longer than that. And she said there are standalone or isolated cases where it could go back even further than 30,000 years. And I thought to myself, well, then there's the 70,000 year event timeline I was referring to, where Billy, it's explained to Billy how long these creatures, they're not older than us. I mean, a lot of people in the Bigfoot community want to say, well, we came from Bigfoot. Bigfoot has been around forever. Well, 30 to 70,000 years, or even 130,000 years, that may seem forever. But if you're a biologist, or if you're a scientist, and you think about generations, if you divide whatever 40 to 70 year generationally into a 70 or 30,000 year time span, that's not really that far. That's recent. That's recent as far as the timeline, as far as
it would be considered modern human.
Yes, it'd be modern, unwritten history, but it would be modern, somewhat recent history as far as archaeology is concerned.
So the what did you call it? His 251.
It was
That's
Contact Report 251. He goes into explaining that all the various forms of people, visitors, extraterrestrials over millennia, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years, going back to the one of the original visits by extraterrestrials to this planet, going back 22 million years ago, and that there
so.
has been successive visits by extraterrestrials who have set up not just colonies, some have set up, I guess you'd want to call them bases where they didn't colonize, and this went on, and some of those people left, some were forced to leave, some are still here. But the Plejaren, their ancestors were here initially 22,000 years ago, and from their visits, all these stories based on which we base on rituals, what we call religions today, made me realize they were very synonymous with what, if you reference what is called the cargo cults. I'm sure you've heard of the cargo cults,
Mhm.
where during World War II, where these biplanes landed on these islands, I think in Micronesia or those areas, and they created a cult saying that the operator, the pilot of these planes, was a god,
Right.
and they called it a cargo cult. That's basically when these UFOs, these extraterrestrial vehicles, visited these primitive societies and civilizations of those times. They started to worship them, and they made them into gods.
And I
And
think that
he's not knocking religion. He's not against religion. He feels that's part of the development of us as human beings. So I'm not religious in that respect. Figo and Billy Meier is not a belief. I mean, my wife is a Catholic, and I respect her right to pursue that and believe that, because one thing in what I refer to as the teaching, the Meier teaching, if you want to call them spiritual teachings, or correctly, the creative energy teachings, the creation energy teachings, is respect everybody's right to a choice to follow whatever they pursue to follow, as long as they're not using it to like cannibalize, kill, and basically commit genocide. That's a little different. That's no longer a religion. Now you're dealing with a cult. But he says all religions started as a cult, and some are still in existence today. Some of those cults don't exist. But he went on to say that, and he's not putting himself on a pedestal. One of the major things I learned when I was at the center, which is where Billy lives in Hinterschmidruti, which is next to a small community called Schmidruti. And in German, Hinter means behind. So where his center is, Hinterschmidruti means behind Schmidruti. So I pulled into Schmidruti, and then we had to drive like 300 meters to get to his farm, his house, and where I met him. And I met some of the people that were working there, and they said, yeah, the last thing you want to do is walk up to Billy and like look up to him like he's some kind of mythological, like he's a guy that's bigger than life, and and he doesn't want he doesn't want to be worshipped. He doesn't want to be put on a pedestal. He wants to be treated just as a common, everyday person, just like you and I. And I'm an older, I went there in 2018. I was in my 60s, and I signed up to do some work on the farm for a few days, and I camped there in a tent at the base of these foothills in the Alps, overlooking the center from up on these foothills, looking down at his house, his compound, and some of these other smaller buildings. And I got to meet some of the people, and everybody was respectful. There's no cult. You're not expected to pay money. You're not prevented from leaving. You're not forced to drink any Kool-Aid. It's not a sex cult. That was a big thing on Wikipedia. They put it's a sex cult. It is not. I was happily married. I had 2 kids. I was going there to find out if this is what he's saying or has written down in the contact conversations regarding Bigfoot, why is it paralleling what Melba Ketchum said in the findings of her Sasquatch Genome Project in her peer-reviewed paper, even though people claim she bought the peer-review magazine to when you're forced to do something because you're being suppressed and you have no other avenue. I'll hear the first guy to tell you I might have done that if I was in her same shoes. In fact, I talked to Melba about that. She says, I wanted to interview her. She says, I don't want to be interviewed. I go, why? She says, I'm so tired of being bashed. I'm tired of it.
Yeah.
And she says, you're a man, and I'm not knocking men, but she says some of the biggest problems she had in the scientific academic community were men. Because even though I don't believe that we should have a patriarchal society, sorry, but this is how the United States and a lot of countries in Western Europe are based on a patriarchal society or a patriarchal form of organization. And so when the powers that be are controlled by men, and they're saying, hey, a woman who's just part of a project, she was not even in charge of it. She was one of many people. She was the only one that raised her hand and said, I want to go public. That's why everybody put the bullseye on her. It wasn't because she was in some way, shape, or form. It was not called the Melba Ketchum Sasquatch Genome Project. It was just called the Sasquatch Genome Project.
Right. Yeah.
So that's when I realized that, I said, I got to go to Switzerland and find out if this guy, what they call, found this information somehow before Melba Ketchum's study, stole it and post-dated it. And there's no evidence of that because his information was copyrighted. So the dates are stamped in stone. He wrote this before there ever was a Sasquatch Genome Project. This information has been out there.
Okay, that's a good segue because I want to go into timeline. The Contact 251, where he goes in and describes all this about Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Yeti. Do you know the date that conversation was published?
I'd have to look it up, but I believe that was published 251. Right now we're in Contact 876, which is just published this month. It's an unauthorized, unofficial contact that was translated. And so you're going back to 251, and they were having them almost every month. I would have to say 251. I want to say it was in the mid 80s, possibly a little later than that. This is long before she did her press conference in 2000, and it was either 2012 or it could have been in 2000.
It was 12.
Yeah.
It wasn't even as much trying to get any point across as far as Melba was concerned. It was more my idea, had Bigfoot already been a part of pop culture? And it back at that time, not as much as it is now. But Bigfoot was already readily known about at that time. Had that information been published, 20 years prior in the mid 1960s when the whole Patterson-Gimlin and all that stuff,
yes,
that would have been a little more, that would have perked me up a little bit more had it been prior to that.
But still, 1967, not everybody even then had a personal computer, maybe unless you were in the CIA and you had a supercomputer that nobody knew about. But in 1985 and 86, it wasn't until the late 90s I got my first household home computer, PC. He published this information in Contact 251, and there were other contact conversations and other numbered contacts that were before the internet existed publicly, before digital media even existed. You might be able to go to a magazine back in the mid 80s like Field and Stream, but you would never encounter any kind of DNA was not even readily accessible then. or didn't even
Right.
exist. So the thing is this was before electronic media existed. This came out in 251, and there were other contact reports, I believe 2 or 3 others, where they discussed again the emergence of Bigfoot, how it came about, and that's, I always believed he was very careful when he wrote his contact conversations to not give all the information, because Billy said many times, and I have to agree with him, because I see how human beings are here, especially in the United States. I can't really comment on how they are in other countries, but I've been in other countries, and not knocking the United States, but because of the incredible control our education system has on us and our government, we're slowly being dumbed down to the point where, unless you want to take the bull by the horns and do your own research and educate yourself, you're always going to accept what the bought and paid for media tells you, whatever you want to call them, the mockingbird media. So I came to the conclusion that where I'm going with this is that he was very careful to omit things that he felt that we weren't ready for, because people will make up in their minds their own biased confirmation because they're not ready for the truth. So they have to have their bias to preserve their sanity. And I say that specifically when he's had to wait several years. In one election that happened in 2016, he knew if he would have announced it 2 to 3 days in advance of that person being elected, and you know who I'm talking about,
Mm-hmm.
Billy may not be around right now. So he had to wait till afterwards to say, yes, that's what I was talking about, but I could not say anything. In the past, he did not. He unfortunately made that mistake, and I guess the people imparting this information to him did not necessarily warn him, if you tell the public this or release this in the contact notes, your life will be at risk. But he did that, and as a result, to this day, there were 25 assassination attempts, the last one being last year. When I
Okay.
was there were 20.
Is there any indication from him or through your discussion with him or any of the information you found as far as who is making an attempt on his life?
He alludes to it, and he also names them several times. And his visitors, as I call them, his friends, the visitors, these extraterrestrials, they also come out and tell him. He tells them how they're doing it and how they'll never be able to successfully get rid of him. They name the Five Eyes agencies. You know who they are, and that would include the Mossad and the CIA. And then there are some crazy people out there, very religious, fanatical, crazy religious nuts. That one was a woman who I believe tried to throw. Well, no, that was an assassination attempt by actually a secret, an intelligence agency, where the woman tried to throw a knife at him, and she it either hit him handle first. I'm not sure. There was another one where he because he has, I would call them consciousness abilities. Now, these aren't paranormal. It's not psychic. It's an ability he says is latent in all of us, but we've never developed it because we're so indoctrinated. By the time we approach 5-6 years of age, we're basically we're taught not to pursue this. We're taught to be good little product producing citizens that contribute to society. People that are, so this is sort of trained out of us, or entrained out of us. He had this dream where he was going to be shot, and he takes his dream seriously because of these consciousness abilities. He woke up one morning, he found a piece of metal plate, like 1/4-inch plate, and he made straps for it, and he put it under his shirt. And there were people that confirmed it and witnessed it that I had met or knew about it firsthand, but I didn't obviously question them. I could read about it in the contact notes. And he walked out with, I believe, two other person, one on either side of him. And this might have been the time when Colonel Wendell Stevens was there at the center trying to debunk or prove whether the Meier case was real or not. And a shot rang out and a bullet hit him in the chest, and it bounced off this metal plate. So he dreamed that before it happened. There was another incident where when I went there in 2018, I believe that year or the year before, he was standing with Daniel in front of his house, facing the hill that actually I worked on. And the assassin was on that hill up in the brush and the trees, shot down toward him, and the bullet went between him and Daniel's head and missed him. So they've always missed him, and there's stories behind why that is. His visitors, they do protect him, and they warn him, hey, you can't, if you say this and release this too early, we can't say we're always going to be here to protect you. So I always take this with a grain of salt when I tell people this, because it's not something I share easily with people. I haven't shared it on any other interviews or podcasts because, first of all, I am not the U.S. media representative for the Meier contacts. There's a gentleman that does that. He's very good at it. He's been researching it for going on 30, 40 plus years, probably longer than that. And his name is Michael Horn. He's a U.S. media representative for Billy Meier. I would recommend you talk to him. My dates aren't accurate. I think I might have got some things wrong, but he's been actually retained through an agreement with Billy Meier and the people at FIGU. FIGU is an interest group, a lands group or interest group that is in Switzerland, that are core group members that do perform duties there. They read the spiritual teachings. They pretty much are going through stages of development and understanding, or if you want to say evolution, to understand the teaching, because it's not just the contacts. The contact reports are like the lights in the sky, the shiny UFOs, and the things that Billy has done, how he lost his arm when he was in Turkey. He used to be called the Phantom. I believe he traveled on foot all around the Levant, the Middle East, India, up into northern India, into Nepal and Bhutan, all the way in through Israel, Jordan. He was retained by Haile Selassie. He was in Iraq and Iran. He was retained as a serial killer hunter. He hunted serial killers. So they named him the Phantom. So all these things you read about in comic books and all these created serial episodes you see on TV about the guy who hunts serial killers, who is a serial killer, that's all based on Billy Meier. And they have pictures of him. He named him Billy because one of his heroes was Billy the Kid. And I'm going to do hopefully some investigations on Billy the Kid and find out who Billy the Kid really is or was.
Do me a favor. So you said Billy is currently how old?
He just turned 87.
Okay, so 82 years ago, they came to him, correct?
Yeah, he was 5 years old, his first visit.
Okay, so what happened 80 years ago that prompted them deciding to reach out? And I guess it's a multi-part question. What event happened 80 years ago that they finally felt the need that they have to get this information to somebody? The other part of the question is, what made Billy so special that they chose him? And in any of his recollections or any of his writings, did they ever tell him that they had done the same with other people throughout history since they've been coming for so long?
Yes. And I have to explain that a little. When they visited him when he was 5 years old, these visitors, it was the father of one of the people visiting him now, Ptah's father. His name is Sephath, Sfath, Sephath. And Sephath, now these people with the advanced technology, they generally live to 300 to 400 years. And with their technology, they can actually, with the use of their own technology, they can actually extend their lives up to 1,900, 1,000 years of age. But generally, their average lifespan is 300, 350, 400 years. So Sephath is no longer around. He died. But when he was an old man, he landed, he was actually telepathically speaking to Billy at 5 years old. And Billy finally met him when his pear-shaped craft landed in a town outside of Zurich, small community where Billy lived, and landed. And Billy, he met the man. This old man came out. He spoke to him telepathically. He eventually went on to this pear-shaped ship, and so that's how the story began. Why he chose him, that's sort of a different story, but to sort of put it in a nutshell, which got me interested in the spiritual teachings. I researched a lot of different religions over my life: Buddhism, Judaism, the various forms of Christianity, Jainism, Native American ritual forms of religion. And they all had one thing in common. They were either monotheistic or they were polytheistic, meaning they worshiped multiple gods. So I thought that just didn't make it, never set well with me. I always felt there was something going on when I got into the Far Eastern religions in India, with like Hinduism and Krishna consciousness, where there was this constant repeated theme about reincarnation.
Yeah.
So in the contact notes, and eventually into the spiritual teaching books, which I own several, they explain that we mistakenly think as our soul as being immortal as Christians, as most Christians do. The soul, you die, your material self, your body, your physical self dies, and it basically diminishes, goes away, but your soul is immortal. In the specifics of the spiritual teachings, that knowledge somehow got lost in the Bible and other religious books. Billy says, no, that's not accurate. Our spirit form is immortal, and the soul was accidentally, erroneously, the soul was used to represent the spirit, when in actuality, the soul represents the psyche. And the psyche is part of our physicality. And when we die and pass, our psyche also diminishes. Our soul does go away. What stays and is immortal is our spirit form. And our spirit form, it when we die, when we pass, we're in the state of sleep, if you want to call it that, in the beyond, for X amount of years, and then we come back. Our spirit form animates the fetus of another human being, a female human being, and is reborn. So
A female? Did
a
you say
female human
female?
being. Yeah, I wanted to specify that. So basically, that's reincarnation. You're incarnated over and over again, and not hundreds or thousands, but millions and millions of times. We're reincarnated because we have to evolve ourselves, develop ourselves to the point where we eventually go back to what I would call the universal consciousness, the creation, the beginning creation. Creation, in an attempt to perfect itself, has to allow the human forms, us, to strive through reincarnation. So what we don't learn or overcome in this lifetime, we will approach and attempt to overcome in the next multiple lifetimes. To eventually we get that right, then we move on to the next lesson.
So when you say the psyche, the soul and the psyche are connected, I'm assuming, and I may be wrong, that you're saying that our soul is connected to what makes us individually, our experiences, our memories, our emotions, our feelings, everything that we held within our brain.
Yes.
And then that part of us passes as long. And it's interesting. And I'm believe me, I'm not trying to argue the point, but I guess I understand. And that description of repeating and going through this time and time again until we reach an ascension of sorts to become the best that we can possibly be, so we can finally return to that original creation. If we don't retain what we've learned, aren't we destined to just continuously and for God knows how long just continue to make the mistakes? If we don't retain what we learned from each life, then it seems like the deck is stacked against you in to further your understanding and further your learning your next time around.
Yeah, and that's a question I approach, but it is explained quite well in several of the books he wrote: The Might of the Thoughts, The Way to Live, The Goblet of the Truth, and a list of many other books, The Psyche, Die Psyche, and they're both in German and English. In those books, they talk about the fact that when you die, your consciousness is dissolved. That's the material consciousness, the coarse material consciousness. Your spirit form exists in what they call a fine fluidal state, or a fine a finer material state. It's not, and he talks about this too. He says scientists will have yet to discover this in the future. They haven't even found out that these are discoveries yet to be made, but that the psyche, which is tied to there's a block. They refer to it as a comprehensive consciousness block, which is made up of all these components, the psyche being part of that. The personality being tied to the consciousness is connected to the psyche. So when you die, Eric, and your psyche and your personality and everything dissolves, it goes back to a place called the storage banks, referred to as a planetary storage banks, confused with the Akashic record. In old Eastern religions, they called it the Akashic records. Sure. Of old Hindu religions and some of the...
Or the universal conscious.
Yeah, it's the Akashic records was a storage, but Billy actually said, he went into detail. He says, no, that's a mistaken word, Akashic records. It's actually the planetary storage banks. So all your actions, your memories, your inactions, everything you said, everything you remembered, everything you did during your current life is stored in your comprehensive consciousness block. And when that is dissolved, all those memories go back into the planetary storage banks like a hard drive in a computer. And then after a period of time, when your spirit form animates into the cells of a fetus after, I believe it's 23 days, that all those memories in that planetary storage bank are connected, are still part of that spirit form. But you cannot, because of the comprehensive consciousness block, you can't remember your previous incarnation or your previous million incarnations or 1,000 incarnations. If you did, you would go insane. You would go crazy. You couldn't handle it. You couldn't handle that maybe you might have been a colonizer or a Native American who got tortured or whatever your past was. So this is where it's set up so you can't remember. There's ways to recover that, your previous personalities, and he refers to it as previous personalities. And let me explain this, how I understood it. If you get in a time machine right now and you go back 300 years ago to your previous personality, what your spirit form inhabited in that previous personality, and you might find it's a person that's totally different than you. That was you then. It's not the same as who you are now. And he makes that distinction. And he says that your personality is the personality you have now, Eric Szilagyi, that's who you are now. In the future, whoever you incarnate in the future, when you come back and incarnate another fetus to become a life form, you'll be a different personality, inhabited by the same spirit form, but even the spirit form has changed. They're different. So because now they're carrying different information. You're carrying the information from this lifetime as opposed to your previous incarnations. So you try to, he said dreams, and there's certain ways you can remember those past lives, but he says it does nobody good because he says the way, the understanding, the way to live is the universe is not this. We don't live. Coincidences aren't chances. Coincidences are part of how a universal consciousness, there's an order to the universe. So what comes into play in your present incarnation today, as you are, is everything that you did not learn in your previous incarnation, that you maybe even experienced, but you didn't learn a lesson to then apply to your life to then correct your behaviors and actions, will confront you in this lifetime. And he says people like to say, oh, that's karma. No, it's totally different. That's not karma. Karma is like you did something bad, so something now bad's going to happen to you. That's not, this is, it's more correctly referred to as cause and effect, which is more in line with physics, how things are. So if I'm incarnated in this lifetime and I go around drilling oil, shitting on the planet, cutting down forests, treating my neighbors like shit, and doing all that, when I get reincarnated in a future lifetime, I'm going to come and visit the mess I left behind. And now I got to live amongst the devastation and the crap I created. Not because of karma, it's because that's how life is. And it can happen, cause and effect can happen during your lifetime. You can do something a year, 2 years ago, 6 months ago, and create a shitstorm, as they say, and then have to revisit that region or area or those people you dealt with that you created the shitstorm with, and now you have all those chickens roosting on the fence that you've got to deal with. So that's cause and effect. So you see it in world events with all these wars. I'm trying to stay away from that subject matter, but if you go into all these wars and invade all these countries, eventually, like a wrecking ball, that's all going to come back to your country. And we're seeing it right now with this immigration, fentanyl, all these things coming into our country, when before that always used to be an exterior problem that we thought would never visit the United States. Well, guess what it is? And
let me ask you, so they explain this reincarnation process. They explain to Billy all these things that you go through and you get stripped down of, and then when you come back, there's a hard fast block that you cannot access what you were previously, or else it would be cause you great issues. Did they explain, is this the same for forgive me, I can't remember the name of the culture, the visitors?
they call themselves the Plejaren.
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 Okay,
That's
so
the name of their they have I think 3 or 4 planets in their system which revolve around the main planet they always mention that they're from is called Era, and that's the name of their planet. And these visitors, most of them come from that planet, not all of them, but they belong to the Plejaren. They're part of a federation called the Plejaren Federation. And believe me, when I read these contact reports, it was a combination of Star Wars, Star Trek, and all these other things. It was like it was better than fiction. And so I had a lot of grains of salt I had to swallow. I had to say, I got to check this out. And
yeah.
so far, the predictions have held true. And the
So
prophecies that have come to pass and become predictions, I'm like, this is the most accurate stuff I've ever read that he has predicted, including the Gulf oil, uh, the spill in the Gulf, the prediction of that and the information regarding that. I was like, that's just chance. He got lucky. He was spitballing, throwing something on the wall and it stuck. No, it's everyone has come true. And that found, to me, that was a sense of, if this is that accurate and the words used were so specific, naming the events, I had to say, well, is he post redacting? Meaning, is he changing the dates
right.
to fit the event? And then I realized, wait a second, there's a copyright involved that prevents that. So you look at the date of publication and you realize it precedes any other. Even he predicted the discovery of the moons of Jupiter, of Io, and all those before NASA discovered them.
So do these rules that they're laying out for the universe and the way it happens in our reincarnations and do these rules hold true to them as well?
Yes.
And is there a finite number of souls available that recycle? And do we ever come back as them, and do they ever come back as us?
Their spirit form is I could say immortal, almost on the verge of being infinite, I guess you'd say. But your spirit form is a spirit form. It's always the same. It's always your spirit form. And if you go through the next 7 incarnations, 20 incarnations, you're that spirit form, but your personality is different. You're still a different person.
But I guess what I'm getting at is, did they ever indicate that this process is how would I put it? A closed system. So for humans, it only happens for humans.
No,
And
it's immutable laws. It's the immutable laws of creation or of the universes. Plus, it's immutable. No matter what race of extraterrestrials are, whether you're these humans that haven't been able to even leave our solar system yet, it affects everybody the same. These Plejaren, when they die, their spirit form goes into the beyond for a period of time. He calls it the great sleep or whatever. And then they reanimate another fetus. And that's how they found Billy. Billy is allegedly, I have to use that word carefully, the oldest spirit form on the planet Earth. Where our spirit forms on average go back 8 to 12 million years, his spirit form goes back before the planet Earth even existed, because he's from another star system. So his spirit form goes back, oh God, I forget, it was so many, it was beyond billion, but it was an incredible number that his spirit form has been around, and previously known as Nocademium. But that's the thing about it. You wonder, well, why did they pick Billy? Why is he so important? Why is he carrying this information? Well, he is they call him the 7th prophet, the last and 7th prophet. Who were the previous 7 prophets? Isaiah, Jeremiah, eventually Emmanuel, Muhammad, and then Billy. Billy was the last. Those are all biblical prophets. And in those previous times, he imparted very similar information, almost identical to what he's imparting today. But what happened to him in those previous incarnations? He was castigated, killed, in some cases executed. The final incarnation he had, which we know as Jesus Christ, was actually, that's an incorrect name. It's actually called Emmanuel, which is mentioned, I think, 4 or 5 times in the Bible. But yet Jesus Christ is actually a name borrowed from the Greek language. And it's very popular. Christos, Jesus, that's a common name, has been used for other people. It was a created term. He actually survived the crucifixion. He lived. He eventually, there's a book written by a man named Edward Martin called Jesus Christ, the Missing Years. I urge, that was one of the eye-opening books I read. It had nothing to do with Figo or Billy, but he researched it through some Russian explorers and some other people that traveled the Far East and India, and eventually found a place called Srinagar, India, which is the, quote, Jesus Christ's final resting place. He was buried there. I believe he was 112 years old when he died. He had several children. He had a wife. He survived the crucifixion. And for those 30 missing years after he left Nazareth in Israel and traveled as a boy and then came back as a man in his 30s, those missing years he spent in the Far East, in India and in Pakistan.
This is blowing my mind. How does the resurrection, if he survived the crucifixion, how does the resurrection even become a thing in modern day Catholicism or Christianity?
It was all deleted or suppressed on the in Constantinople at the time, now called Istanbul. They had the councils of Nicaea, where they took the Bible and they basically not just retranslated it, but they redacted. They got rid of the Book of the Giants, the Book of Enoch. He got rid of all these books, and they limited his disciples to 12, when there were like, I think there was like over 70 disciples, and I believe 50. It's mentioned how many were women. I may be wrong in this. I thought there were 57 women that were actually his disciples also. But because of Christianity taking this information and basically redacting it, suppressing it, and changing it to make it more of a patriarchal type of belief system and making it a religion, not a teaching, not a guide for how to live your life. That's what it was intended for. Emmanuel was, he survived the crucifixion, and they changed it into a resurrection. He ascended into heaven. And I always wondered about this. And the more I read about it, I realized there was no ascension. He was, some of his visitor friends, even Emmanuel, just like Billy currently, Emmanuel was visited by the visitors, and he was taken care of. He was shared this knowledge, and he himself can access the storage banks to know the fact of who he was in his previous incarnations. Billy has some, I'll tell you a story. It was just a story.
Just hang on to that.
Hold up.
Hang on to that. So I think what I'm hearing is correct, but I mean, straighten me out on this. Billy's spirit,
spirit
form was also the same spirit form that belonged to Emmanuel, who was
Jesus Christ.
Apparently Jesus Christ.
Yes. I know it's hard pill to swallow, and I grew up a Catholic. I was baptized a Catholic, and
well, I'm open to seeing outside the box. So these visitors have been taking care of this spirit.
They found
through seven incarnations of being prophet-like entities.
But they had to find him. See, they had to find him in this current incarnation when he was 5. They had to find out I believe they developed a technology, if you want to call it that, what they call a technology to determine where his spirit form would pop up next in what personality, and they have a computer. It's I call it's an organic computer. It's like a mixture of organics and technology, and it does probability calculations. It's sort of like it's not actually predicting the future. It's showing the probability of where Billy's, or it's actually called the spirit form is referred to the original personality was called Nocodemian, and they wanted to find out where his spirit form was popping up next. And they finally discovered it popped up in a 5-year-old by the name of Eduard Albert Meier. Billy is just his nickname. And this 5-year-old. And when I read this at 12 years old, he wrote an essay. When I read it, it was like an essay I could not write right now as a 71-year-old man. This essay I read that he wrote when he was 12 years old was so far beyond anybody, even back then, that was 3 times his age. I was like, how is this kid so wise? How is he? Well, that's why he was not liked much. He grew up like I won't say like me, but he grew up in a Catholic society in Switzerland, and it was very belligerent for anybody who believed anything other than that belief system. So he was repeatedly beaten, abused. He was set on. He was mercilessly beat, and he had a couple people that looked after him. This one gentleman named Father Zimmerman, who the visitors actually visited. They had telepathic communication with. I'm not sure if Zimmerman actually met the visitors. He might have had a face-to-face, but he was actually he was trusted with Billy's care as a young boy in the Catholic school system. And I had a taste of that growing up. I had a taste of how I was treated as in grade school and in high school as a young Catholic man. And I have nothing good to say about the Vatican, but I'm not going to tell people that are religious, because people need to find this out for themselves. All that you could do by telling people about, well, Baptists are this, Catholics are this, Jewish people are that, is you create animosity. And nobody can ever stand shoulder to shoulder to view the problem across the field with the same set of eyes and say, hey, we have to, even though we don't agree on how to live our lives or what we believe, we still have to address the problem and take care of it together as a community. Well, our community is so fractured now with all these sectarian beliefs, not just religion, but political and all these other forms of sectarian groups you can think of. So we can't, and of course, I believe I can truly say I believe it's, in many cases, it's the shadow government. I don't call it the deep state. It's a shadow government. The people that know that every 4 years you just get a new guy representing them, but they can do whatever they want because they're career people, and they've been doing this for 50, 60, 70 years in the intelligence agencies and every other nondescript agency nobody knows about. So so Meier, when I started learning about him, I was thinking he has some stories that are incredible. And I almost joined the Foreign Legion because when I was a young man, I got in trouble with the law, and I thought maybe if I sign up for the Foreign Legion, it'll help me be a better person. But what I didn't know about the Foreign Legion is they pretty much populate their ranks with ex-criminals and really not nice people. So I was lucky not the justice system would not sign me over to the Foreign Legion. They would have let me go into the Army probably, but I figured, no, I think the best special forces I had read about when I was a young man was the Foreign Legion, and I wanted to be part of that. Well, Billy joined the Foreign Legion, and to my knowledge, he is the only man in the history of the Foreign Legion to go AWOL and live to tell about it. When I read about that story, I was like, what the hell? I mean, that I was like, and from that training in the Foreign Legion, he actually walked across the desert and survived with two other escapees from the Foreign Legion, and they didn't make it. He did, and I always wanted to find out what happened to those other two guys. But he wrote a book called, it's in German only, has not been translated into English, and the book is called The Rosa-Rote Crystal, or the Crystal Rose, or the Rose Crystal, and it's a book about all the names of the places, and his wives and the people he associated with were changed to protect him. But it's he always refers to it as a romance novel, but it's the story of his life as the living in the Middle East as the Phantom, this man who joined the Foreign Legion and escaped and lived to tell about it, and eventually come back to Switzerland and create the farm called the Center at Hinterschmidruti, which I visited. So I felt, it was a major life-changing event for me, because I thought, if you can imagine meeting somebody you didn't know existed, and then you found out they existed, and then nobody wanted to tell you about them, and it was suppressed, but you were able to go back and meet that person, like Amelia Earhart. You were able to go back and meet Amelia Earhart. She was still alive, and you had the opportunity, and nobody believed you.
Well, I mean, you're enamored with him. That much is obvious. I'm curious, like when you were there, at one point you used the word compound, and to me that's got a very cultish connotation to it.
That was probably incorrect. I would call it a farm. Okay. You got storage buildings, outbuildings. You got a couple trailers, and you got the big house that him and Eva live in, and he's got children. He's got three children. He's with his partner now. His third wife, he got divorced from. His first, his final wife, the fourth woman, she got divorced. Poppy, he divorced her. The other three women died through catastrophic events in the Middle East, and he said he was more like common law. But one was overrun by a mob and trampled to death. One of his wives, another one of his wives in India. He built a cabin near this bottoms by a river that was a riverbed that was dry. And he was hiking one day, and I guess there was a storm in the distance in the mountains. And he got within a couple hundred meters above his cabin and was looking down, and he saw his wife come out the front door of the cabin. And he looked, and he heard this roar from a distance. And he looks, and he sees these giant headwaters with trees and branches and boulders coming down on the cabin, washed her away and killed her. And then he had a third wife who he was walking through the desert, and they found an oasis, and he was going to go gather firewood, and they were going to basically camp out there during the night. I believe this was the Sahara. And he came back to find her. Well, he heard her scream. He came back, and she had been bitten by a desert snake, a venomous snake, and she died in his arms. So he went through all this stuff that probably, I don't know how, if I'd be alive, a lot of people going through this would have probably gone crazy, maybe committed suicide, who knows what. He wrote poems about it. He wrote books based on it, the Rosa-Rote Crystal. And his fourth wife, Poppy, he married her, and then they got divorced, and now he's living with his partner, what us Americans would call common law. So it's, and I only said it was a compound because that's what people like to say, that they call it that in Wikipedia, a compound. It's nothing like that.
Does he have followers? And I guess you know, to the extent is his property, is his compound, is his property with several buildings, are there people that follow him who reside there with him?
There's a couple people that they have jobs outside Hinterschmidruti, but they live there. There's a couple uh, trailers, like RV type trailers there that people live in, and they have jobs outside that area, that center, or whatever you want to call it, and then they come back nightly and live there. And I think, and then there's people that live outside that area, like in Fishingen, where I was at. I stayed in a community called Fishingen. There were people I met that were members or core members, they call them, that lived in Fishingen, but they had their weekly duties where they would go to the center and work in the with the livestock, feed the livestock, uh, water the garden, pick tomatoes, pick strawberries, whatever. So I would almost consider that it was more, reminded me of a community or a commune, is what we might refer to it in the States, but it wasn't like a commune, like a bunch of hippies, and it wasn't anything like that. These are people that when you meet them, they look like you and I. They're just regular people. They dress like, they're like, and when I was there, I worked in the garden for 3 days, and other places, uh, raking up leaves, picking up sticks, cleaning up the hillsides of all the debris, picking strawberries in the garden, watering tomato plants. I wanted to sort of be there to sort of earn my. See, you don't stay there for free. It's no different if I came to your house and you had a working farm.
Right.
Meanwhile, you and your wife and kids were out there working on the farm, and I'm just sleeping in the bedroom and eating your food. You're going to say, no, you're going to stack bales of hay. You're going to feed the cows. We're going to put you to work to earn your stay. So rather than take Swiss francs to pay for your meals and pay for it like a motel, you earn your stay. So I worked there for the 3-4 days I was there. I worked there, and that was my way of earning my way. So they took that work and they put it toward, that way then they feed you. You get one free meal a day. You pay for the other 2 meals, which are not expensive, and then you contribute through your labor. And you can stay there. You got to basically let them know in advance. You reserve a period of time, 1-2 weeks, and stay there. And Billy knows that if you come a distance, like you come from the United States, he's going to make it a point to meet you. Now, if you come from, Lichtenberg or Switzerland or Austria, right across the border, you might be there for 3 or 4 days and never see him. He's not, I guess if I would be a little paranoid too, based on people, Americans we want to barge in and say, just, hey, we're here. We want to meet with you. And it's just not how it is. I mean, he's tired of that. And also the fact that they've attempted, now it's 25 assassination attempts. He's a little leery of meeting people. He's very careful. So if you put in a reservation and say you're going to come and you're going to be there, when you say you're going to be there, he expects you to be there. He already knows you're going to come. But if you just like show up and say, hey, I want to talk to you, no, he's past that. He dealt with Shirley MacLaine. He went through that with Shirley MacLaine. She was there for several weeks, 6 weeks, whatever. And he was a young man then, and she badgered him daily with questions. And I think he realized that as an 87-year-old man, or when I met him, he was 81. He's past that. He doesn't want to deal with that anymore. So and I'm not so much enamored with him as I'm more enamored with the information, the spiritual teaching, not him. He's just a conduit of information to me.
So all right, we're almost an hour and 40 into this. I'd like you to kind of wrap this up in a nice, neat little bow, if it's possible.
If it's possible.
And what I want to know is, so, the visitors are imparting this information to him, and he's he's publishing it. He's publishing works that are stood behind by the visitors, and then he's also publishing stuff that was not necessarily intended to go out, but they said it's okay that it goes out. Are the visitors expecting that the word be passed by him to all of mankind, and that we are to follow that and understand that this is the way? This is the way. That's a great show, by the way. Or are they making it known to him that they are going to eventually, at some point, reveal themselves to all of us? Or are we, because do you see what I'm getting at here is like, okay, so the Catholic religion, Christianity, expects us to believe that just because you have the figurehead of Jesus Christ, that no matter what's said about Jesus Christ, you're supposed to believe it, and you're supposed to believe all the things that go along with that.
Yes.
And that he will eventually return. And at that time, you better hope you got all your stuff packed and have been a good person, because if not, it's not going to work out too good for you. So are they planning on revealing themselves to give everyone this knowledge? Or is the expectation that we tell Billy obviously is very prolific at writing. You said how many different books he's written?
I think it's 55 books now, and then plus with the contact notes, there's in excess of 30,000 plus pages of contact note conversations, and some are haven't been translated into English. Others have. Now we're at contact 876. And that's like, so in the more recent past, there's been almost one contact a month. There was a contact almost every month since I visited him back in 2018. It's quite regular. And in regard to what you were just saying, what you were sort of asking, there is no expectation of anybody to believe it. The information is freely available, even though it is suppressed by the internet. It's freely available through certain websites like futureofmankind.uk.org, figo.org, on the interest groups, Colorado Interest Group .com. There's the Canadian Lands Group, Canadian Figo Lands Group, and all these other countries. They all have their own lands groups, which are interest groups or study groups. Believe it or not, of all the countries in the world, the United States is the only one that doesn't have an officially recognized Figo Lands Group, because we talk the talk of democracy, but we can't we can't do direct democracy in this country. These groups are based on a direct democracy. In other words, nobody is elected. We elect petitions. We vote on referendums. We don't elect or vote people. That's a representative democracy. In Switzerland had and is still sort of struggling to try to stick to a direct democracy, but Switzerland is now doing what the West is doing. They're voting for people who make promises. And also in regard to that, there is no expectation. Billy says he doesn't, and I agree. I think of the Jehovah's Witnesses, or when I was a young Catholic, how they expected us to missionize or proselytize, sort of like even the Baptists do. They sort of try to sell it. There is no proselytizing, no missionizing. If I have a book in the house and my kids come in my house and they see it and they read it and they ask me about, hey, what's this about? They're on their journey of discovery, and I have to let them be. I'm answering your questions not because I'm preaching or telling you this is what you need to believe.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that this information is abundantly and freely available. You can go to various sites and buy the books. You can discuss the information with people like me. I'm not a passive member. I'm not a core member. I'm thinking about being a passive member, but that has nothing to do with belonging to a cult. There's no expectation on anybody. There is no self-righteousness. But again, we're all human beings and we all make mistakes. And just like anybody else in any other group, we even probably have people that pretend to think they're better than other people. And I
Oh,
have to
for sure.
constantly look in the mirror and say, hey, I'm just another person. Due to my own hard work and detective work, I discovered this information. Nobody came and laid it in my lap and say, check this out. I just wanted to know more. And it was hard in the early days because back in 2007 and 8, when I revisited the Meier information, even then it was hard to query and use search engines to find stuff out because they didn't want you to know about it. It was like a hidden gem in the West here, and I'm like, what's the big deal? Why is all the stuff I'm looking up by people who hate the information and who have a claim that Billy is this or that, but they've never visited the center, never read the source material, even the contact notes, and didn't have a clue. And I don't pretend to be any smarter than anybody else, but I thought it was incumbent that I find out on my own just to prove it to myself. I'm not here to prove it to anybody who listens to this and say, hey, you have to follow. No. Come in with all your skepticism and doubt and don't believe anything anybody says. Strangely enough, Billy says that himself. He'll tell you, if you ask him, should I believe you? He'll say, don't believe me. Think for yourself. Don't believe anything. That's what he'll say. So, I mean, that tells me, right there, I was like, well, that was sort of like the central sort of focus when you investigate. Don't believe anything. If you're a good investigator or detective, don't believe anything. Think for yourself. So you sort of got to be your own sort of personal Sherlock Holmes in this whole thing. And I think
It's just interesting to me that the investment of time that the visitors have spent. I mean, because by your own words, they have babysat and coddled and kept safe this original spirit form, older than anything else, older than our planet. They have invested that much time and that much effort, and they've given him so much information that.
And it's not just, let me clarify that. When you say given him information, Billy having access to the storage banks and having these consciousness abilities, a lot of the material he writes is not imparted to him by the visitors. Sure, some of the history of mankind, the hidden history of mankind, the hidden sciences, they've shared some of that information, but a lot of it he's been able to remember or access from his previous incarnations or the storage banks. He's been able to access this information from these, what I call higher spiritual levels that are, they have names for these higher spiritual levels, which are, the best way I could explain it is after you get reincarnate over millions and millions of times, eventually you're no longer come back into a physical form. You become eventually half energy or half spiritual, and then eventually you become 100% non-physical. You become just an energy. And these are these spiritual levels he's accessing because even his visitors, he has surprised them, made them mystified when he came and told them this information. And they were like, we never gave you this information. How do you know? Well, he's he's the seventh of the previous 6 prophets in the lineage named in the Bible. And yet their scribes took that information and basically erroneously mistranslated it to what we see in even the earlier versions of the Bible before they became all the various versions of the of the James editions of the later translations. In the first editions, there were already erroneous, and you have to go back to even in the time of Israel, as you know him as Jesus Christ, Emmanuel. The scribes were. He talked about that time period. People were like, "Well, everybody was literate like we are today?" He goes, "No. The majority of the people living in Nazareth, in towns like that, Bethlehem, in Israel in general, 99% of the people could not read or write. You had a scribe. Might have been 1 out of 10,000 people, 1 out of 1,000 people that would read and write. These were the people that took the information from Emmanuel and mistranslated into what we know as the Old and the New Testament. And unfortunately, that's the book we have today. The King James versions even made it worse because those were more mistranslations based on earlier books. So Billy wrote a book. Well, I should say he wrote a book in his previous incarnation that he discovered through a man called Isa Rashid, who was instructed to by Billy to go to this cave, and the book called the Talmud Emmanuel, which his previous incarnation wrote, would be found there, and he found it. And that was the first iteration of, I guess, what you would call part of the New, or possibly all of the New Testament. And that book you can buy to this day. Billy was able to correct some of the mistranslations by Isa Rashid. He translated it from Aramaic into, I believe, German, and then potentially into English, but I believe he did into German. And Billy, when he got that book, he was able to find the mistakes in it and correct it. And that book I do not have, but it's Talmud Emmanuel. And Emmanuel is not spelled with an E, it's spelled with a silent J at the beginning. So that was all changed, but it's been an amazing journey for me. Like I said, this is the culmination of, if you want to call it, my Bigfoot research brought me to this place. And Bigfoot is as amazing as it is. When I was at the center, one of the people there I met, Michael Voigtlander, came up to me and he says, Bigfoot is no big deal here. It's like, in America, everybody's got a car in their driveway. So if I went to you and said, Eric, I've discovered cars, and I find out some people have them in their garage so we can't see them, but some people park them in the driveway. And you said to me, well, Don, where we live, cars are no big deal. Everybody's got one.
Yeah.
That's the impression I got when he said, well, Bigfoots are no big deal. Like Billy's seen them. It's like just part of human history that's been suppressed. Why they're suppressing it in this country? There's a lot of different reasons for that, and I can understand that, because they don't want the public to know, for obvious reasons. They don't want the public to be paranoid that there may be another race of human-like beings living sequestered and somewhat staying to themselves and not wanting to interact with human beings for obvious good reasons. And why the government isn't coming forward, like the Indians said, Native Americans, are you just finding out you can't trust your own government? We knew that hundreds of years ago.
Yeah.
So
unfortunately, yeah. You blew my mind, Don. You blew my mind.
Well,
this is, from the standpoint of somebody who I had heard of Billy, I've never gone in to investigate. I didn't know the depth or the parameters of his beliefs, his teachings, his understandings. As you say some of the stuff that you say about it, you do have to understand that there is a component to it that sounds like, if Billy came out with a glass of Kool-Aid, I'm not drinking it. There is a component to that. And
yeah. I urge people, like you just said there, I urge people to use skepticism and don't believe, think for yourself. And in doing so,
critical
critical thought.
thought is immensely important for everyone, and especially nowadays.
Yeah, and he talks about that people are so eager, even to go to Switzerland, to go to the center, to meet Billy, because what are they? They want to see a light in the sky. They want to see a UFO flying around, or UAP. And it's like, I've seen 3 UFOs in my life, and I'm like, that's just eye candy. I want to find out why they're coming here, what the reason behind it is for. And he's the only contactee, the only true contactee in the world that explains why they're visiting, why this group of visitors are coming. They feel responsible for our plight and why we're sort of stagnating, and we're stuck in our development. We're still a bunch of warring monkeys on this planet. And yet I felt, well, all the religions I checked out when I was a younger man, and I checked out a lot of different religions. I read a lot of books on Buddhism and Hinduism and some really primitive cult-like religions, and nothing had an answer for me. It was always, the solution is outside yourself to some kind of tin god or pie in the sky. And I felt, well, that's taking away my responsibility to be accountable and responsible for myself. No, the Plejaren are coming to save us. Billy ain't coming to save us. We're in this mess, and we got to get ourselves out. That's one of the main things I got out of reading the information. Not even the spiritual information, just the contact notes.
Yeah.
That he's not, if we're going to devastate our planet, short of it affecting the cosmos and the solar system outside our planetary system, they're not going to intervene. And he had an opportunity. Billy did send a letter he drafted to the Carter administration on the hope that they would meet with Billy as the intermediary and possibly try to mend fences with Russia, stop the Cold War, stop us going into other countries in trying to deal with basically regime change and doing all this kind of stuff we were involved in. And what happened is the CIA got involved, and the letter they returned back was, no, we don't want Billy as the intermediary. We want to meet with the visitors. That's what he got from Washington, D.C., from the White House.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, they're not ready to meet with us. And they later on in other conversations with Billy said, it's probably not going to happen for a long time, us meeting with people on Earth, because we're not ready. We're not developed enough to be able to deal with the possibility of meeting these people.
Yeah.
We're just not ready. And so there's no UFO going to land on the lawn at the Capitol building. It's not going to happen. So,
Don, it's been a pleasure. Do me a favor for my listeners. Let everybody know where they can find Unacknowledged and Unknown, anything that you have your hands into. Give everybody the rundown of your Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all that stuff, so they can track you down.
Yeah, you can find me at that's a letter U and U52 at Instagram under Don Schneider. And you can also find me on YouTube at Unacknowledged and Unknown. That's what U and U stand for. And you can also find me on Rumble at U and U52. Sounds the way it's spelled. And I believe those are pretty much the free platforms I use: YouTube, Instagram, and Rumble for now. It's just pretty time consuming. I still do some Bigfoot research. It's limited as I get older. I just can't hike in there and do miles like I used to. But as far as the Meier information, I would tell you, Eric, to look into it for yourself and read some of the information, get some of the books, buy one of the early contact block books and read it yourself. Potentially have somebody on like Michael Horn and interview him. He could definitely touch bases more specifically with dates and times than I can. I wish I would have had a list of all the dates and times I could have given you. Like I said, it's freely available. I'm not, and Billy just considers him the herald or a teacher. He doesn't like the word prophet because that takes on sort of a mystical meaning, and he doesn't like that word. So a herald is just sort of somebody who's like there to like, hey, tell everybody, hey, this is what's going on.
Yeah.
And share it with the world, you know. And I just consider myself that fortunate enough to say a few things, more than a few things about it.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating. Certainly makes you think. Don, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you, my friend.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for having me on.